welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach, and up next we discuss triumphs and mistakes in racing using the first weekend of the World Championships to illustrate examples of what to do or not. Final call for submitting questions in time for the next monthly Q&A episode. If your question doesn't make it, by the way, into this one, we will still save it for later. Mm-hmm. So it's best to just simply submit a question whenever it's on your mind, because it's easy to do. You get it answered, and we can talk about it on air. Mm-hmm. Go to AtoZrunning.com/question. Do that right now.
Woohoo! Last week, we talked about the rules for realizing your dreams, and I had posted if people think that shoulds or should nots are more effective for them. And I really like the shoulds, and I told you why last week, and Zach likes the shouldn'ts. And so then I asked the question, what works better for you? And a lot of you threw your thoughts into the ring. And let's see, Rob, he points out when competing, it's much more productive to think about what you should do and not what you shouldn't. And that's just his 2 cents worth.
But you didn't explain why, Rob. What is the point in answering a question if you don't tell us why?
Well, he was thinking more like mindset. Like it's more positive to think about the things that you're going to do in the race, not like don't trip.
But he didn't say all of those things. You did. So now you're assuming you know what Rob's thinking when he's answering this question.
Zach,
Rob,
you're so critical every
time.
You
gotta explain your answer.
Okay. And then Claire wrote, in terms of my running form, I want to be told the should cues so that I can say these things and remind myself while out running to connect those body parts instantaneously and notice an immediate effect. I actually picked up loads of these from your episodes with Betsy from Mama Made Strong. However, when looking at our training programs, routines, drills, knowing what doesn't work and why is sometimes helpful. So can I sit on the fence with this one?
No.
Yes, because we gave you both in last week's episode. We gave you boundaries of things, but also direction.
Yeah.
And so the direction is the shoulds,
I'm just
and the
saying,
shouldn'ts is the boundary.
Sitting on a fence is never comfortable. So don't.
Okay. Making it funny there. So I'm back using my hip hook, and I just want to throw that out there again because I wasn't able to use it right after my labrum tear repairs on my right and my left hips, and I'm able to use it again, and that's a relief. So I thought I would mention it again for all of you who have hip flexor tightness, and the code for that to get a discount is ATOZ. Super simple, just ATOZ. If you also have hip flexor tightness that you want to be trigger released, it's a very hard to get place.
Trigger released.
Trigger release.
Release triggered? Trigger released. Okay, well anyway, now let's get on to our exciting conversation for the main topic about triumphs and mistakes in the context of the World Championships. So perhaps I should explain a little bit more about what we're trying to do with the main topic here. We wanted to talk about triumphs and mistakes in racing. We wanted to talk about how we race and fight and some of those kinds of things. But the World Championships are also going on. Yeah. And we just kept thinking, there's a lot to talk about in the World Championships that's interesting and exciting and fascinating. Mm-hmm. But also that kind of, there's some lessons that we tend to like to apply to our own running and experiences too when we see these things. So that's what we're going to do here. You be the judge of whether we do so successfully. Well, let's start with a little bit of a reflection on triumphs in general so you know where we're trying to get at with that. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because this is me putting on my English teacher hat for a moment. It's been a while. It's been a long while.
It's been a long time.
Which means I'm probably not qualified to put on an English teacher hat anymore. But I'm going to do so anyway because, that's I'm the one talking and I have a microphone in front of me. So here's the point. When we talk about fighting, any kind of fight, any kind of combat,
is this what that is?
I mean,
see, that's not what a race is to me. So
that's not what it is. But when we talk about any kind of conflict, for any reason, English teachers everywhere love to recite the 3 kinds or formats of conflict, and in the context of the 3 opponents that we are all fighting. The first is man versus man, so the opponent is somebody else. The second is versus self. So whatever the inside, internal.
Lots of that going
yep.
on in running.
And the third is nature, which I always find to be very interesting in the context of running. We'll connect those dots in a moment. And I would also argue that there is, in fact, a fourth opponent, which is like spiritual powers and things like that. But apparently English teachers don't ever teach specifically to that, although many include that within nature. Anyway, aside from that, we wanted to look at these aspects as they tend to play out a lot in our running experiences, partly because we're not all triumphing in the same way. Like a triumph doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. You know, some people are trying to win the race, and so they are literally trying to triumph against other people. Some people are trying to run a personal best, which is very much an internal thing. But I would wager that all of us, regardless of the end result we're trying to achieve, are having some amount of combating with ourselves and nature. Because by the very nature of running, we're always fighting against like discomfort, struggle.
Yeah.
Challenge, conditions.
It's like one of the
sometimes.
ultimate examples for struggle.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
So true. Okay, so that's the nature of kind of what we want to try to address here. And we have some very general practical things with some of this, like what are the different ways that we compete against other people. Certainly race strategy, parts and pieces of that. And there's a lot of interesting, you wonder with something like the World Championships, Andy, how many people in that race have a plan and are trying to implement that plan? There can't be very many, right? Because they're all doing the same thing, more or less. So there's a few people that are implementing their plan, and everyone else is just kind of doing what the other people are doing, right? Right? No?
I think that a lot of people have multiple ways that they think that the race can play out in a championship. So I think that's much different than going into, let's say we have a half marathon on the schedule and we are racing to try to just see where our fitness is, what we're capable of. We're going to run that differently than a championship style race.
Indeed. That is very true.
Yeah.
So there's certainly a number of things that we are going to try to uncover here. So in doing that, let's do so in the context of these World Championships as they've been unfolding. So it's the first weekend, and I say first weekend, but it's like a week and a half. It's like a 10-day long thing.
Yeah. It's 10 days, literally.
Most of the finals happen in the first 4 days and the last 4 days. There's a couple of days in between. There's just not quite as much going on. So that's why it feels like 2 weekends.
But I mean, there's stuff going on all week. Like
yes.
Monday, a lot of you guys are going to be listening either Monday night when we publish or Tuesday. And Monday has some pretty amazing races, a 3,000 meter steeplechase and also the 1,500. And then in the morning, the women's marathon.
I thought you forgot about that for a moment.
No. I'm just saying like in the evening. So yeah, there's a lot going on a Monday.
Well, so we are not going to talk about the Monday events right now. Spoiler, because we're recording this before they've happened. But we will in the next episode. So
yes.
Stick around for that one if you want to hear about the women's marathon. So what we're going to try to do here is the first weekend of finals where some of our favorite races, like the 10,000 meter, which is just one of the greatest events of all time, period, to race in a championship because it's so interesting. All right, so let's start with that. In the women's 10,000.
Yeah,
Randy.
The women's 10,000. In her debut, 21-year-old Ryukiya Hironaka of Japan pushed out an early lead, and she led more than half of this stacked race, which was very brave of her. She was inserting herself in this race. She is a young runner. It was her world championship debut, and she's taking the lead against some of the best women of all time in the event.
So is that a triumph or a mistake?
I think it was a mistake because she still ran well. She was 12th place, but she went out pretty fast, and I think she burned herself a bit in the later stages. I can't really say because I don't know what she anticipated to get from that race. Maybe that's what she needed to do in order to end up in 12th, but it would have probably been more comfortable to be a little bit more even and, run in the back of the race for a while. But she took the lead. It wasn't thrust upon her because sometimes that happens in racing too.
You just find yourself stuck in first place.
Yeah.
Don't know what to do. It's true, actually. It does happen.
So going out too fast, though, is a common mistake that people make, and they end up burning themselves in the late stages. And it was really kind of surprising to see that in that mixed relay that happened, the 4x4.
Oh, the 4x4. I'm like, what are you talking
mixed
about?
relay, because our two American women actually did go out too fast and then ended up tying up in the last little bit. So experienced runners do it because there's like adrenaline pumping. You want to put yourself out there. You want to give yourself the opportunity to have a race of a lifetime. But again, we go back for distance running, because I can't speak to 400-meter running, but we need to be able to listen to our effort to know what is possible. Like, where am I at, and be honest with that, and then try to run intelligently during the race. But I do realize it's really hard, because something that clouds that sometimes is adrenaline. And so you don't really feel the ramifications until later. So a reserve start is often what we recommend to people, but in a championship, that's kind of hard to do because you have to be in the race to some extent.
So mistake number 1, don't go out too hard.
Yes. Don't go out too hard.
Too hard too soon, or some combination of that. And this is so we definitely talk about that with any runner of any level all the time. But at the championship level, you hear runners a lot of times talk about, like, you have to kind of do things differently because it's not the same kind of race. But in the end, it doesn't really matter what kind of race it is. If you go too hard too soon, you will not run as well as you could if you didn't.
Right.
So that is true for these, and we're going to speak to that in a couple of different instances here across the first weekend of the World Championships, as it were. But that was a clear example of, you've got the best in the world in the 10,000 meters, and literally the 2 fastest ever are in this race. Letesenbet Gide, who holds the current world record in the 10,000, and then Sifan Hassan, who ran the world record just before Gide, and it was only a few seconds slower, so Gide broke it by only a few seconds. So the 2 fastest ever by a long shot were in this race. Like, going out hard here, you're not going to gain anything by it.
You're just pacemaking
not
them,
in terms
which
of
I bet
like
they
end
appreciated.
finish.
And it actually came down to a sprint finish,
as these things do.
Which makes for exciting races to watch. And I have a clip from NBC. It's like a highlight. I think it's like 30 minutes. But
a 30-minute highlight.
I know,
which is the whole race.
Yeah, that wasn't the whole thing though, because they
they just recorded a little before or a little after, because the race was 30 minutes and 9 seconds.
Well, maybe I'm wrong in the duration. But Letesenbet Gide, she leaned to claim her win over Helen Obiri, running at 30:09.94.
Fast.
And the triumph of this is that she ran through that line. She knew she had to. So in this situation, you just you go. But there are other situations where you just have to run through the line because you don't know where people are at exactly. She knew she was having pressure. And sometimes there's a jumbotron, but many of us don't have the luxury of a jumbotron.
A giant television telling us where everyone is
exactly.
in the race. Huh.
So I think, though, the lesson to be learned in that triumph is to run through the line. If you want to get every last bit of yourself. And also, I mentioned this on another podcast episode, but if there's an official timing system, you don't need to stop your watch. And a lot of people will grab their wrists, and that actually causes them to slow before they cross the line, where they then will stop their watch.
But that official timing system doesn't post to my Strava. What am I supposed to do about that?
You said that last time too, because you always got to bring that up. But
that's what people literally say.
There's a service, though. The service of a race, you're paying for them to time you, so that can, especially in a fast track race like this, which not a lot of us do that frequently, but I think it's a lesson to be learned. So running through the line, Gide only beat Obiri by 0.08 of a second.
This was the
so
closest 10,000 meter finish I've ever seen. Between
it was insane.
All 3 top finishers.
Right. So this is Gide's first global title. I want to mention that she was silver at the Tokyo Games to Sifan Hassan, who I'll get to momentarily. Margaret Kiplimo Kipkemboi of Kenya was third, only 0.13 of a second after Gide. So, like he was said,
they all finished within 0.2 of each other. Is kind of the point here.
Yep. And Gide ran a 60-second last lap.
That's very fast.
Yeah. According to Sidious Mag, in an interview with Helen O'Beary, she said she was ready to run a 60-second closer. She ended up running 61, so she called it. She called
61. I think Helen O'Beary actually had a faster closing lap, didn't she? Because
Well,
she was further behind.
This is according to World Athletics,
okay.
so
Well,
I feel like they probably have
I
it
guess
right.
they have the chips in the bibs, so they probably know better than I do.
Probably do. Yeah. Speaking of Sifan Hassan, she had a great last 200. She passed a lot of people, but she was unable to claim a podium. She placed 4th, and her mistake was trusting that she had the best kick and waiting too long, which happens in a lot of middle distance runs when everybody thinks they have the best kick.
Well, that's because at the top of her game, Sifan Hassan does have the best kick,
Yeah.
but she was not her best.
So maybe the mistake instead is trusting on past success, trusting your past success that will be replicated undoubtedly, but you still have to do the work every time.
In fact. So the other thing that's fascinating here in particular with Gide's triumph is that she's facing a situation where the momentum is against her winning a final kick in a race. She almost never has prior to this one. She's outkicked by the likes of Helen O'Beary and Sifan Hassan in these kinds of races pretty much every time. And so you're in a situation here where as the race is getting later and later, I'm just constantly wondering to myself, is she starting to feel nervous or doubt? And she very likely may have been, because she was also interested in seeing that pace pick up a little bit earlier on, trying to help scoot it along.
Yeah. I think it was Taye who took it for a little bit, but then
the two of them were exchanging back and forth, some countrywomen.
Yeah, Gide then took it over, and they switched back, and then Gide ended up being the closer, and she was the one being chased and hunted. So
yes. So that's one of those situations where she is trying to do something that historically hasn't always worked out for her. And so she's having to kind of, combat, not only trying to beat some world-class athletes, but do so in a way that is not her strength, which is difficult to do.
Yeah.
Or at least it wasn't. Clearly,
I was rooting for her at the Olympics in Tokyo, where she was second. She had her silver. This is, like I mentioned, is her first world title, so that's fun to see her be able to take that podium and also have that world record. So yeah, a lot of good stuff happening in the 10,000, including our U.S. women. Carissa Schweizer was 9th in a personal best time of 30:18.05, which, hey. Wow. That's almost an American record.
5 seconds off the U.S. record.
That's speedy. Yeah. So 9th place for Carissa, and she hung in there in that top pack for a long time. She was trying to put herself in the position, in the fight.
I mean, you can't do much more than run your best time ever and nearly break your national record.
Yeah.
It just so happens that the rest of those women were just that much faster.
It's just incredible.
At least in that instance.
Alicia Munson was 13th, and Natasha Rogers ran a personal best time of 31:10, for 15th. And speaking of personal best, 11 women in the 19 athlete field got personal best times.
Well, that's not too bad.
No, not for conditions especially.
So there you have it. The women's 10,000 meter, a very exciting race.
Yes.
So in the men's marathon, which was the next, we're kind of going chronologically as these things happened. The men's marathon was early in the morning. What time was it their time? Like 6:15 their time, which is good because it's summer. And even in Oregon, the summer is not the coolest time of year. So we don't mind a marathon that's not in the middle of the day. So this one was a curious one for us at the outset because you don't have Eliud Kipchoge in the race, which he doesn't do world championships every single time, and so that's not surprising when he sometimes isn't in the race. But naturally, he's one of the ones who's always a favorite when he races. Then on the American side, Galen Rupp, the top American who has medaled in the Olympics in 2016, not coming into this race with the greatest confidence because he's had some health issues in this last training season. And so one of them being a back problem, which is difficult to overcome for a runner. So there's that. But then there's also like a situation last year in the Olympics, in the Tokyo Olympics, the Ethiopians hold many of the top all-time times in the marathon, and a few of them were in this race. But not that they ran those times, but some of the best times ever. And these guys are in this race. But they were also in the Tokyo Olympics marathon, but not a single one of them even finished the race there.
There's a lot of dropouts though in that race.
It was very hot. And so that being the case, this year was interesting because it's like, okay, the Ethiopians, are back with a vengeance. It's also better weather conditions, which favors, a faster race, which favors the people who have run faster times. So like things like that were all fascinating to me. That being the case, I would not have guessed the results as they were. And so let's start with just, Temarat Tola of Ethiopia won the race in just a resounding victory.
Very decisive.
Incredible performance. And from about 30K on, it was just his race. And nobody stood a chance against him. He just started dropping crazy times. Like he dropped a 240K. At one point in the 30 to 33K range, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And then his fastest 5K was from 33 to 38K, so it's a 42K race. I know I'm using K a lot because, us and our miles, we can't figure it out. But 42 kilometers is the total distance of a marathon, right? And so at 33 to 38 kilometers, he ran 13:55.
That's so fast.
For 5K.
Smoking
so fast.
Yeah.
So he was just on his own, just tearing it up, and that was cool. So Tola of Ethiopia took the gold decisively in a championship record time, 2:05:36, which is an impressive thing. And you have to always, so anytime, this is one of my reflections with the marathon in general, anytime someone is running as fast as he was in the late stages of a long, difficult race like that, there's some amount of like triumph over nature happening there, because I don't think it's natural for the human body to be able to output that much capacity when you're that tired already, or you've already, worked that hard for that long. So whether it's natural or not is not relevant. He did it. So proved me wrong, I guess. But then not only did Tola take the victory for Ethiopia, his countryman, Masinet Geremu, took second. So they had no medals in Tokyo. They went 1-2 here this time around, and also was under the previous championship record. So Tola broke the record by a lot. And then a minute behind him was his countryman, who was also still under the previous record. And then right with him was Bashir Abdi of Belgium.
Wow.
The first medal for Belgium in the marathon in the World Championships. And his second international medal, because he medaled in the Olympics as well last year. So Bashir Abdi is just like, a constant presence in these international championships lately. So he takes third, also under the previous championship record.
So all three were under the previous record. Wow.
So that's a cool thing.
Yeah.
Now, there's a slight comment here, an aside, as we're talking about triumphs, because it kind of strikes me as it's somewhat of a triumph over nature in terms of the concept of the shoes. Because it's like, designing shoe technologies that can make you faster, just simply by the very nature of your innovation.
How long is it going to be before someone brings up shoes?
Yeah,
Come on,
right.
Zach.
But I had to say it only because the previous championship record was set in 2009, long before super shoes. And we know that they add advantage, period. We know that. Even if it's small, it's there. And so for a marathon, because it's so long, it's something. Anyway, so these guys, they were all breaking championship records left and right. But
another record.
More records were happening behind, because then in fourth place, Cam Levins of Canada, first Canadian to ever finish that high up, or the best finish by a Canadian. Also a new national record in 2:07:10. And only like 15 seconds off the previous championship record. Like, this is just, he was blazing.
Yeah.
So nice work, Cam Levins.
Run.
And I have to say, there's another element here that's important with Cam Levins' example. When we're talking about motivation in marathons, especially when it's late stages and everyone's hurting, and you're just kind of like, okay, at this point, Cam Levins knew at some point there, you don't know definitively, but he knew that the medals were running away from him. And he just kept powering forward. You could tell he was not feeling great anymore in the final stages, but just running strong and pushing through that for a fourth place finish, but also a national record, certainly a personal best. because it's a national record. It's probably a personal best when he's Canadian.
Sure.
So
That makes sense.
So a great performance, but at the same time, you're having to fight against that moment of like, I see the race leaving me behind, but I have to stay motivated.
I was going to talk about this later, but I'll talk about it now. And I think it is extremely important to having your triumph, to have goals beyond your performance goal. And I'm meaning those that are out of your control. You can't make someone else run slower. That's just not.
I beg to differ.
I in a legal, nice
Okay,
way,
all
if
right,
you want to be run with integrity. So, I'm just saying, you can't control what other people do. You can run only to the best of your abilities.
True.
So, if you are able to have goals that are in addition to your performance goals, I like the idea of having a goal that you can always accomplish that is within your will and control. Something like I will run this race to completion unless you have a medical emergency.
Until I either finish or pass out.
Another thing that I do, something that is performance related but gives me another goal, is I say to myself, today, under any circumstance, I can at least do this. And so when I'm in the race, I don't let myself just quit because I'm not hitting the goal the goal I wanted, or even the goal I hoped for. Sometimes it's like, C or D goal. And I'm like, but Andy, on any day you can persevere and do this. So
Indeed.
I do think that there is something to be said about having goals that are more within your control, or having multiple goals, as we've discussed with guests like Dakota Lindworm. She's mentioned that on our episode with her, and other guests too have talked about having more than one goal, and then also just being able to find joy in it, because most of us choose to do this. Most of us, this is not our job. So if we can find the joy in running and the experience and find out how we can be challenged and how we can overcome, we're going to be much more satisfied in that triumph.
Indeed, these are good thoughts. Speaking of other triumphs in the marathon race, a quick mention too, because there was another national record for Zimbabwe by Isaac Mpofu. If I
In
said that
10th
name
place.
correctly.
So
In
that
10th
he had a
place.
top 10 finish too. So
Yep.
that's got to feel good. National record and top 10. And that was 2:07:56.
Excellent work there too. And then we did mention Ethiopia went 1-2 after not finishing anyone in the Olympics last year. Not only did they go 1-2 though, their third runner in the race was in 6th place.
Wow.
So their 3 men, each country only had 3 unless you have the returning champion. Their 3 men were 1-2-6.
So if we scored it separately from everything else, they won as a team.
They
I would
did
say
that
pretty profoundly.
They did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another
Okay. Now
great men's distance race.
Well, before we get onto that, we have
okay.
to at least mention another mistake that is going to come up a number of other times here, and it's just not being alert of your surroundings. It's something that runners often do because we're tired late in races, and so like Andy doesn't notice a cone and steps on it and slips and falls,
Call
or
me out.
just the lines in the pavement, which apparently are slippery.
Thanks. Yeah.
I wouldn't know, but
slipped
some
and fell on
have
those,
slipped
yeah.
on. But there's worse instances of these things. There were a lot of falls in
There's
like
been a lot of
everything
falls.
so far
On
that
the
we've
track.
watched. On the track, on the marathon,
Yeah.
lots of falls.
Lots of falls.
So American Colin McCow fell at an aid station because everyone's trying to reach over for bottles,
Yeah.
and they all have to go to the same. Okay, these people, when you set up an aid station, there are so many ways to do it better, and they just never try. Like, don't put
They probably tried, Zach.
don't put every table for every country right next to each other.
Yeah,
just space them out.
Just space them
It's
out.
not
That's
that
true.
hard.
They
Or
don't
put
do
a
that.
few on the other side.
You don't know
of
the
road.
limitations. They might have had
I
limitations.
do know the limitations
What?
because they got to create this course any way they wanted to,
Oh.
which means they could do a lot of things with these aid stations.
Okay, Zach's a little fired
Okay.
up.
I'm just saying the
on.
number of times we saw problems with the aid station, and It was brutal.
And I would also like to say running too close to other people. Not only will you annoy the person that you're running close to, but also you could get tripped
Might be
up.
a strategy.
You could get tripped up. Well, I did see some strategy going on with some cup droppage at people's feet and things like that.
That was not cool.
That was not cool.
So
watch out for anything that's on the
watch out.
court. Watch out for others. Try to give yourself a little elbow room. I think it's good to protect your space.
Yes. So what Andy is mentioning there is that it looked like, and obviously we don't know if they were doing it on purpose, but it clearly is easy to avoid this problem. In the marathon, they have these huge bottles. They're like 20-ounce bottles that they're giving them at the aid stations. Everyone has their own bottles, right? And so these runners would grab these huge bottles, and they would take like 4 sips of them and then toss them off to the side. But some of them, instead of tossing them off to the side, would literally just reach over and drop them right on the feet of the guy next to him. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Seems little intentional.
Either you're trying to trip the person, or you're so oblivious to the fact that this 20-ounce bottle that's basically full of fluid is not an obstacle to a marathoner who's super tired? Okay, I digress for the moment. But yes, so that was like the whole theme of just trying to, stay alert, be aware of where you are in proximity to others, where you are in proximity to other things, like steeplechase barriers. We'll get to that in a moment. Mm-hmm. Lots of interesting things.
Yep. Moving on to the men's 10,000 meter run on the track now. Back on track.
Oh, I see what you did there. Yeah, look at you.
It was a very exciting race. It was another that kept you guessing throughout the race whose it was going to be.
Well, it kept some people guessing.
I mean,
I just knew.
You knew.
No,
you didn't.
Not. Of course not.
Yeah.
However, this is going back to then as we're talking about like how we compete against other people. So the question that I kind of posed earlier, which I'm always fascinated about, is how many people in a race are in fact running their race plan. And you never quite know, because a lot of times like the race plan is to run what someone else is doing. And I wonder about this sometimes. Like you see what looks like someone is intentionally following certain people. Like anytime someone makes a move, this other person always makes the move behind them and just stays with them. So clearly their race plan is to chase that person because they assume that person is one of the ones who might win the race. And that's not always a bad – in fact, that's often a good idea, because if there are people in the race who tend to make really good choices, like historically, that's a good person to follow. So I wonder about that. But go back to then, so you have a couple of different scenarios here in terms of like the race strategy and how it's playing out against other people. So it's like contrasting, do I go earlier or do I wait until the kick? The people who like to go earlier tend to do so because they don't have as strong of a kick as others. And so they're just going to do what they can to try to burn someone's kick out. However, that also makes it harder, because if people can stick with you in races like these, there's no one who's like way better than everyone else. So someone who's doing something like that is taking a major risk. So that's always a curious one. And then you have the do you want to try to control the race or just sit back and react to what other people are doing? Controlling the race doesn't always mean they're going hard, because a lot of times you saw people in the men's 10,000 going up to the front and then slowing down.
Yep.
And so they're controlling the race, but they're not doing so in a way they're like trying to keep it contained as opposed to extending it out. But then you would have situations where someone would go out, extend the race, going hard, and then after a little while, then slow down. Yeah. And it's just fascinating to me. All these different okay, so why that decision then? And it's good stuff.
It is.
Okay, so back to the specifics of the race then. First, let's kind of play it out here. It came down to like a huge pack of guys in the last lap. And this never happens in the international 10,000 meter championships. And part of the reason why is because there's always people in that race who are not great kickers, but can run super fast times. And so they're just going to take off with like a mile to go or something like that. That didn't happen this time. As a matter of fact, it kind of did. And that was Jacob Kiplimo of Uganda. And it was not surprising, because Jacob Kiplimo, first of all, holds the current world record in the half marathon. Okay, so he's got serious potential in distance races, but is known to not be as strong of a kicker as other track guys. He's not a track specialist. He's a road specialist who does the track races well, right?
Well,
I mean, he was bronze medalist in the Olympics. He does them well. But the point being, it was not surprising when he took the lead and he started dropping the times. But what was surprising is when he then backed off with like 3 laps to go or something like that. It's like, what are you doing, man? You're giving the kickers, you're giving the kickers the race back when you do that. And for some reason, he did. And I still, to this moment, I want to know if it was on purpose or if he was like feeling like, I don't have it if I keep this up. I don't know. Or if his countryman Joshua Cheptegei was like, dude, stop it. You're killing me. Who knows? But the point is,
who was leading it?
It was Jacob Kiplimo who set that tone.
Kiplimo was. Okay,
yep.
Yeah.
Cheptegei went with him and then took over, and they went back and forth a little bit. But
okay.
Kiplimo's the one who set the tone.
Sure.
So that being the case, because they slowed down again, the group kind of collected back together, and there were like 8 guys in a huge clump, not strung out, in a clump with a lap to go.
Like all with awkward striding because they're
like
all
chopping
too close
each other
together.
Yeah. Wild.
Yeah.
So now it becomes a kicker's race, which is exactly the kind of thing that in the 10,000 you feel like half the people in the race don't want it to be, and it happened, in the most surprising ways. So Joshua Cheptegei, who lost the kick battle in the Olympics last year to Ethiopia's Salomon Barega, Cheptegei, by the way, from Uganda. So you would have thought he didn't want it to be another kick race with the guy who happens to outkick people a lot in distance races. However, he let it be that. So he's the one who, with 200 to go, actually, I should say what was very especially interesting here is that Cheptegei was able to get on the rail with the last 200, so he had the tightest corner around, the shortest corner, as they say. And Barega was like on his shoulder trying to get in front of him right before the curve. And Cheptegei clearly was trying to make sure he stayed side by side with Barega to force Barega to run the longer curve, which was very tactical. You could tell that's what he was trying to do because he kept just watching to make sure as Barega would go a little bit, he would go a little bit, but he wouldn't go so hard to gap him so Barega could get in behind him. He just kept him right beside him. So that was cool. Anyway, Cheptegei took the race.
Yep.
Here's the end. Cheptegei took the race in what looked like the most comfortable finish I've ever seen him finish.
He looked good.
Like he was storming down the 100,
which is really good
and
to
just
see.
Looked smooth.
Because he had a rough 2021.
Yeah, those Olympics last year, he did not look great. He looked like he was fighting for every step.
Yeah. So, who was second, Zach?
I'm gonna get to that story too. Okay. But countryman Jacob Kiplimo was third. So he repeated his finish from the Olympics, third in both. And so you got the Ugandans first and third. And then the surprise, or perhaps in my opinion, what was the most impressive thing about the entire race.
Which wasn't talked about. I don't understand why the announcers didn't talk about it. But
they might not have realized.
This is a great story.
So Kenya's Stanley Waitaka Mburu finishes second for the silver medal.
Mm-hmm.
He's young. He's like 21, 22 years old. Not very well decorated yet, but he's been successful. So he's clearly rising and very proving himself in many levels. So he finishes second, which is great. His kick was just enormous. It was very impressive. However, the surprise here is that he fell early in the race to the track. Boom,
all the way down.
Dropped.
On his stomach.
And then almost fell again.
It was I don't know if he actually got stepped on. I don't think he did.
Stepped on.
But,
no.
I mean, there's a bunch of guys right there. It was so
It was early in the race. So, the whole field was right there.
Yeah. I think, who hurdled them?
Yeah, I can't remember. Someone jumped over him.
One of our USA guys had to hurdle him.
So he fell. And in the fall, immediately, this is one of those situations where it's like, okay, what do you do in the moment of falling in a world championship race? You see this happen a lot, and it's almost always instant emotion, like just I lost it because I tripped kind of thing, or in this instance, someone else tripped me. But what he did, he hit the track, and it was like a spring, hit the track and popped right back up, and then took right off.
Yeah.
And caught right back up to everybody. The race wasn't fast yet, so it was still kind of just starting to ratchet up. And so he had the moment where it wasn't too aggressive and was able to catch right back up.
I think an early fall is better than a late fall, though.
Are you talking?
Don't you think?
Well, I mean, yes.
Because emotionally, when you're so tired and you fall, then you have this emotional reaction, and then you stumble, and you're like, you're more upset. Where in the beginning, you're still running on that adrenaline. You pop back up.
Sure.
But he almost fell again.
Almost fell again.
So he was having a rough
He's just getting
go of
tripped
it.
up a lot.
Yeah.
People were clipping his heels and stuff. And yeah. So anyway, he
Got back
overcame.
up,
So let's talk
overcame.
about the triumph of the day. Was definitely that right there. Silver medal after falling in the race.
Yeah.
Does not happen very often.
It doesn't happen very often. And I
incredible.
think the composure piece, that's something that is very hard for me, I think, because there's a lot of emotions and I feel things deeply. So if something happens to me in a race, I do have to really focus on relaxing and trying to, as Dakota Lindworm, I've mentioned her a couple times in this episode, probably because it was a recent one, but she talked about how she reframes things. So like if someone passes her, she's like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to latch on. There's an opportunity for me to change things up. And so for him to like bounce back up and to be able to still take his shot at a world championship medal, that is heroic. Mental capacity there.
Yeah, it was impressive stuff, and so he did exactly that. And I would have to say, based off of how things unfolded, I can't say that I saw too many like major mistakes in this event in particular, except for that certainly there's a lot of bumping around because it was a really tightly packed group of people running together.
Yeah.
There was an early surge. And you wonder if the guy who did it, Mayo from, where's he from? Spain, maybe? I can't remember now. But he didn't end up finishing all that badly, though. And so, like, it was probably a smart move for him because it kept the race a little bit quicker. And as a consequence, he didn't have to, like, just wait a while until someone, blazed in the end.
Yeah.
Was able to
I feel like hindsight, you can always see more stuff than when you're actually, like, in it. Because I did feel like there was a lot of bouncing around that was wasted energy, and I think being so tight, the group being so tight, and those that were on the rail, I think had a disadvantage because I think they had to shorten their strides. They had to be, I think it takes a lot of energy to have to like be so aware of the person in front of you, where like maybe in that instance it would have been better to go more towards the outside, give yourself more space so you're not so jumbled up with the other runners. But I don't know, that's just something I was thinking about during that race.
Well, it certainly could be. I would wager the potential that Grant Fisher would have medaled if he were better positioned in that entirety of that last lap, because I think the nature of how he had to run the last lap was inhibiting him from a better final lap. So
he's bouncing inside, outside.
Well,
inside,
not in the
outside.
last lap. That was earlier on. But
Okay.
So Grant Fisher, United States, finished 4th, which is the best finish of an American in the World Championships 10K ever. It ties Galen Rupp's best finish, which was also 4th back in like 2013 or something. However, Grant Fisher was closer to 3rd than Rupp was then. So they counted as like a better finish, I guess you could say. In any event, he was 4th by like a tenth of a second. He was right there, and he was gaining on those other guys in the last 100 to the point where it's like, man, if he had 5 more meters, he might have actually passed Jacob Kiplimo.
Yeah.
And Grant Fisher does have an excellent kick. He's a very fast miler as well as accomplished in the distances. So, but the difficulty here, and I don't know if it was a mistake or just he didn't have any options, but he was on the rail when the bell lap started, the last lap started. And this was a clump of like 8 guys. And so he had no choice about what he could do except to just hang on and stay in his position because he couldn't move anywhere, forward, back, or otherwise. And so when the final 200 came, he was still locked in and couldn't go anywhere. And I just kept thinking, could he have extended himself a little bit better? Could he have run more effectively in that last lap and turned on a little bit more speed if he didn't have to hedge because of all of the runners around him, surrounding him?
But that's like one of those things you can see in hindsight, but when you're in the thick of it,
I mean,
it's hard to find your place.
He didn't have a choice either way. So
But very strong run for sure from our American record holder.
Indeed. Well done, Grant Fisher. That was impressive.
Some non-finals that we wanted to touch on because of the racing tactics part of our conversation. The women's 1500. Now we're talking about the semis. So not to be confused with tomorrow night's Well, it depends on when you're listening.
When
right?
are you listening to this?
Yeah, it's not the Monday night finals that we're discussing. We're just discussing the semifinals.
Okay. So that being the case, just a couple of quick notes here. The favorites looked really good through the rounds, so that's always, frightening for the people who are the non-favorites. When you have the likes of Faith Kipyegon, who just
Looking
wins
good.
everything, and you have Gudaf Sige, who's either winning everything or second to Faith Kipyegon, one of the two. And then Laura Muir of Great Britain, who has struggled a bit this spring, but was looking great in the semifinals. So we'll see. However, we wanted to make mention of Ellie St. Pierre's race from the United States, in large part because this represents that constant theme we're talking about, where just not being alert enough or not being aware of position and situation enough, because she's just in a position almost right away that was clearly a very bad spot to be. She was like boxed in and in the back 2/3, like the final third of the group. And so no matter what, if you want to try to make any choices, you have to first go backwards and then go around everyone, because you can't just push people out to the side. Although some did that quite a bit this weekend. But, and so I'm watching this and I'm thinking to myself, that's the one place that Ellie St. Pierre never is in a race. And so in that moment, like, what's happening where she ends up in a spot that she literally never goes to in races? Yeah. And so it's, whatever the situation, we don't know what was going on in her mind.
Yeah, not that she was unaware, but maybe she just got stuck
lapse
there.
In awareness is what it was.
Yeah,
because
maybe.
you just never, that you can avoid that by simply not going into the rail when you're in that area in the race. Yeah. So that was, that was a bummer.
Probably
because
split-second decision.
Yeah, who knows? That was a bummer because she never quite was able to have contact with where the race was happening up front, and she kind of went out the back door when it was evident that the race was running away from her, and she just kind of faded out. So
I want to bring this back to practical here, okay? Because
that was impractical.
I'm just saying this is more of the race chatter when you all want to know like what you can do in a race to triumph, right? And avoid mistakes. So I don't know if you noticed, Zach, but all of the strong runners, you could tell pretty early on who was more relaxed, and that actually gave you more confidence that they were going to stick in it later in the race. Like, they looked more calm. Wouldn't you agree?
Look calm and
keep
calm and carry on.
Yeah, but one of my big mistakes in races that haven't gone as well for me is that I become really worked up and tense. And my body literally carries that tension. My shoulders are higher. My breathing isn't as full.
You even sometimes yell at the spectators.
I don't either. Don't listen to him. And we talked about this with Lindsay Flanagan, and she said she has to focus on this too, like relaxing her shoulders and her arms, because she will also carry tension. But this is a really practical takeaway. Before a race, you're feeling nervous, just physically roll your shoulders, do your mobility, get in a space where you're feeling more calm. And maybe I shouldn't say feeling more calm, because the energy that you're having when you're nervous can actually be beneficial in the beginnings of your race, but turn that anxiety to excitement. Your body doesn't know the difference. That was actually one of the best pieces of advice I got from one of my high school coaches, not the one you know, but a different one. Okay. And he had told me, he's like, Andy, all this nervousness that you have, change that to excitement. And it's a better, it's definitely helps you relax more. And I'm talking about like relax in the sense of my body tension. And the excitement then is a better framework than for my racing. But I wanted to bring that to this race in the 1500 because it is a really fast race and you have to be engaged. But you can tell those that have been doing it a long time, these are women at the top of their games, how relaxed their bodies can be while they're moving so fast. So fast.
Yeah, that's not easy to do.
No.
In principle, the idea of relaxing when you're trying to like do something aggressive sounds like a tension, but when you're well prepared for the physiological effort that you do, and you're well prepared for the mental state you need to be in, It's largely simply a matter of executing the thing that's familiar to your body and your mind. And so that part of that is like, it's just, you got to do it a little bit. It's really hard to relax while running a race if it's your first race or for instance, right?
Well, there's some of you that are listening that it's been a long time since you've raced or you're getting back into racing. And we love that you're listening to this show. But to be able to give yourself some grace, to be able to relax, to think of the things in your life that you are how this has aided in your life, how it's helped you thrive, and how you are there out of your own will to be there and choosing to be in that moment instead of feeling pressure that often is just perceived. Sometimes I feel pressure, but the pressure is just me.
And my point then is simply, don't wait until the one race to have an experience like that. Like,
sign up for more races.
other races or do in training things that are similar to a race experience.
Yeah. That's really good advice. Yeah.
Pretty helpful stuff sometimes. Okay, so in the women's steeple, then in the prelim, I am not trying to be mean, Andy, with this, but this is another example of one of these mistakes that seem to be happening occasionally. And I should note, and I probably should have said this earlier, at the very least, to have some grace in general on the athletes competing in the World Championships, because you're on the world stage, the highest level of competition, and these international contests and championships, like everything feels like it's on the line for these athletes, and so it's not a normal experience for most.
Even if they've done it a lot of times.
Well, for some, they're clearly very comfortable competing at this level. There's some who just have done it a lot, and Shelly Ann Fraser-Price, who just like wins everything all the time. Now that's in the 100 meters. That's a different animal, but very impressive on that level. The point is that when I talk about something like in this women's steeple, it's understandable that things like this will happen. Yeah.
They do happen. They've happened to you.
They do. Leah Mayer, or something of that sort.
It's Meyer.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay. Of Germany, was in the steeplechase. And if you're familiar with the steeplechase, you run half a lap normally on the track. And then the next 7 laps, because it's 3,000 meters, are with barriers, right? And one of those barriers has a pit of water after it that preferably you jump mostly over and just land a little bit in the water.
I landed a lot in the water when I did it.
Some people do that. And so what happens, most athletes step on the barrier and kind of like vault off of it forward so that they don't land too deep in the water. That's the most common principle. You'll see a number of them, because they're going so fast, just hurdle it and they still are okay. In any event, what you don't want to do is dive headfirst into the water. It takes quite a bit of time to get back out of it. It usually isn't conducive to fast racing. So this is what Leah Meyer did, and it was entirely, who knows why. It was clearly just entirely in the moment. She missed it. She either didn't see the barrier as she was approaching it, or didn't realize she was getting up to it that quickly. Whatever the case may be, she just jumped too late. And couldn't get over it. And so her feet hit the barrier and she just went head first into the water. Totally under the water. Like, took a dive.
I feel for her. That's so rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I don't think it's that she's not alert, though, because I bet she's like highly alert. But it's just one of those things that when you're frazzled or when you're,
who knows?
Or like you said,
I have done it before as well.
Ouch,
that exact thing. I jumped and caught my toe on the barrier and head first into the water.
So rough. I hope she's okay. Yeah.
Yes. Well, she appeared to be, because she did get up and continue running.
Good for her.
Yes. But the pictures.
That's the only reason why you're bringing this up. This isn't even like a practical conversation.
We're going to embed a few photos that you have to go to AtoZrunning.com and
see. Come on.
It is the most incredible moment when she is up to her waist in the water. And I mean up to her waist, like from her head to her waist, and her legs are sticking straight up.
You guys, I'm sorry. I apologize.
I'm starting to laugh right
okay.
here.
So, what do you want to say next? The men's steeple prelim?
Well, no, but I wanted to mention that. So in the women's steeple final, all 3 Americans advanced to final.
Yeah.
But not a single one of them did so in the automatic qualification
I
spot,
think that
which
there
is
was a
interesting.
miscommunication. I think
You
there
think
was,
they thought that they
I
were
do,
in the spot?
because all of them backed off.
It looked like it. That's part of
Yes.
what's interesting to us. So all 3 U.S. women were in
Courtney
different
was
heats.
obvious because she knew what time she needed to get. So
Yes, because she was in the last heat. She
Yeah.
knew where the cutoff time was. So
she
it
backed
seems to
off.
us that
Yeah.
she wasn't concerned. But the point being, all 3 U.S. women were, they call it the automatic qualification, which is like the first 5 finishers in the heat. And then the, I don't even know what they call it, but it's the next few fastest times.
So,
Also
small
qualify.
small qualify.
Yes.
Small Q, big Q.
So that's what they put on the side. So
Yeah.
that's
But it's
what
actually
we say.
3. It was the top 3 go, and all of our U.S. women were 4th.
We're 4th.
Yep.
And so like it seemed like it was on purpose because in every instance, like Emma Coburn didn't look
looked-
like
yeah.
she was giving her all.
No.
She
She
just
backed
looked
off
like
at
she
the
was
end.
just running strong
Yeah.
and comfortable.
Yeah.
And didn't look like disappointed when she finished.
No.
Like, oh, I can't believe I just missed the final. So I just keep thinking, like, did they think,
I think
that it was
it's
top
usually
4?
top 4 though.
It is
in
usually top
Steeple.
4.
So I think
So,
I
I don't
think
know.
there was a miscommunication. That's
Well,
what I
it
think.
was either top 3 and they were 4th or top 4 and they were 5th. But whatever the case may be, it looked like they were confident they were getting in when they weren't, in fact. However, because they all ran fast enough, they did still all make it to finals.
Yes.
So I'm kind of hoping for like a redemption race in the finals for all 3 of them. Courtney Wayment is the 3rd. We mentioned Coburn and Frericks. And so all 3 of them are great steeplers. Frericks and Coburn have medaled before multiple times in World Championship stuff. Courtney Frericks is the 4th fastest time ever by a human female in the steeplechase.
Yep.
And so she's, we're excited for that final. But my point here being, it may have been a mistake. Either way, it ended up in a triumph.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
we're looking forward to the next one. On the men's steeple then, is similarly, some Americans advancing to finals. And not all 3 in this instance. Bernard Keeter did not make it on to finals. But Evan Jager did. Hillary Board did as well.
And you're saying this, but by this time they'll have run the finals. So
Yes,
make sure.
but we are going to cover that next week.
yes.
So.
Yes.
But the point that I wanted to make here in this particular instance is that you get like Hillary Bohr. We've talked with him a number of times. We've talked with him on the air, and then we've followed his in interviews and stuff, and heard him say a number of times about how in executing the race, how he has to run his race, and he can't get too caught up in what other people are doing because crazy things happen, and especially in the steeplechase where you have to be focused because you're jumping so much, things like that. And so I hear him say that, and then I'm watching the race and I'm thinking like, he's doing what he has to do to give himself the best possible chance.
Our episode with him was called "How Champions Race,"
and indeed,
I feel like he gave some good insight. Yeah.
So that's a good one.
Should have had him on the show discussing this right now, but he's a
Get him on the
little
follow-up.
busy.
Wait, right now?
He's a little busy.
All right. And then finally in the men's 1500 meters semi, just like all of it was
Mess.
Yeah, the conversation around staying alert and people like bonking into each other and stuff.
It was really aggressive.
It was chaos.
But I think it
in
was
this
like
race.
more just so aggressive.
Yeah. And like a lot of it looked intentional, like people trying to cut each other off.
It was weird.
It was weird.
Yeah, isn't this supposed to be the gentleman's sport?
No, maybe once upon a time. Now it's see how much you can get away with.
Oh goodness.
Trip people, push people, drop water bottles on their feet.
Oh.
So in any event, we did get to see American Josh Thompson advance to final, and so that was cool. He was not, coming up into the championships was not necessarily one that everyone was anticipating having the best possible chances, and yet he is the American in the finals and looks good.
Yeah. And speaking of falling and jostling, that was the reason why we don't have 2.
Yes. So Johnny Gregoric got cut off in his semi right before the finish. I don't know exactly how close he was, like 50 meters,
and
40
he was
meters
in striking
out.
distance.
And he was accelerating,
he was
or at
in
least
striking
appeared to be
distance.
at the moment. And I can't remember his name, but of Great Britain, was trying to take the inside lane. No, it wasn't Josh Kerr. He was way out there. It was Gorley. There we go. So Gorley from Great Britain was trying to like move around someone in front of him and take the inside, but Johnny Gregoric was already there.
Yeah.
And so instead he just kind of pushed him, like ran into the front of him and tripped him. And they both fell because, you can't really get away very easily with running into someone without both falling.
Yeah, and Cooper Tier, we found out the reason why we didn't see the performance that we might have anticipated from him is that he's injured. So
yes. And,
unfortunate.
So we'll see. By the time you hear us talking, you know more than we do, which is cool and exciting.
And we're going to be talking about it next week.
And what we're going to do next week then is we're going to follow up with the report and what else has happened and kind of give you the closing remarks on the World Championships, as well as kind of some final practical application of mistakes we need to be avoiding as we're preparing for races and as we're racing ourselves, and the ways that we can be successful. We're doing that next week? We're going to do that next week.
Okay,
so we'll kind of wrap it all up for you.
Yep. So in a little reflection, races are a reward. I kind of hung up right there. Races are a reward for your hard work, a test of your fitness. And if we can avoid some of these mistakes and move towards triumphs, we're going to have more fun in running. And we're going to thrive, which is the whole point of our show, where we want to help runners thrive.
Indeed we do. And perhaps one of the best ways that we can help you thrive is by answering questions that you might have about your training, your experiences, your racing, all of these things. And in order to get those questions answered sooner rather than later, you need to go right now to AtoZrunning.com/question. Submit it right there. It's very easy. You just put your name, type your question, put all the details you want us to know so we can best answer it, and then we'll share some thoughts, and we will do that soon. And that'll be fun. However, if that's not enough, if you need a little more engagement than just a question answered, perhaps check out our coaching services page, and you can find that by searching for the word coaching at AtoZrunning.com.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.